Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the DSFL Quarterly Report. That guy over there is Danny DeBock, and I, of course, am your host, Nick Rice. We have a loaded show for you today. Some incredible games were underway in Week 8 of the Greatest Team season. We saw a sensational Buffalo comeback against the Houston Texans, along with a thrilling come-from-behind win for a potential snub for the Pro Bowl. We'll talk about that. Brett Favre against Cunningham's Vikings. We saw some sensational games previously, but coming up, Miami plays New England in a battle for first out of the AFC East. What to expect in that game? Maybe the best division of the league, the NFC West, is also coming down to the bitter end of the Greatest Team season. We've got that and a whole lot more on the show. It's a Quarterly Report. I'm Nick Rice, and that's Danny DeBock. Danny, are you ready to get it started?
Let's do it. Let's talk about it.
All right, and it all began on Red Zone in Week 8 of the Greatest Team season. We saw a couple of surprises with the game between Montana and Manning billed as one of the great quarterback matchups of the whole year. In fact, one of the greatest that America will ever see, and it wound up being a huge dud, but San Francisco prevailed, and now the 49ers and Rams are two of the best horses in the race at the midway point of the Greatest Team season.
And no surprise, especially for San Francisco and how well they've looked on the offensive side of the ball. And when you look at the San Francisco offense, you can't look no further than Jerry Rice and John Taylor on the receiving end. They have been prolific all season for San Francisco. Joe Montana was one of the top leading vote getters for the Pro Bowl, and clearly in evidence during this midway point of the season. San Francisco has been spectacular, only losing one game to a really good 2013 Seahawks team. So with them only having lost one so far this season, well, it's going to be a race to the finish. Who's going to win that division? And this could be a case where the winner of this division could very well be having a first-round bye in the playoffs. And it seems as if both these two teams, San Francisco and St. Louis, will be having the top records in the NFC, but one of which is going to be a wild card team. So that leads into many different questions that are at stake. But right now, it's a race to the finish. San Francisco won that critical game against St. Louis early on this season, blowing out the Rams in the majority of the contest before the Rams made the scoreline look somewhat respectable. But San Francisco, like I said before, they are the favorite, and they seem to be still the favorite. But this upcoming stretch will be, quite the ride for them. A lot of tough games down the stretch for the San Francisco 49ers. But for the St. Louis Rams, their offense is definitely not a question either. With the surprise emergence of Oz Hakeem, who we thought was a great kick returner. But no, he's so much more than a kick returner. Oz Hakeem has been one of the leading touchdown scorers in the Greatest Team season for the St. Louis Rams. Very impressive from what we see. The offense has been the mainstay. But for the Seattle Seahawks, maybe a little bit of some struggles as of late within these past 4 games. 2 key losses. First to, surprisingly, the Arizona Cardinals at home. Seahawk fans will know the struggles that they have with the Cardinals, no matter how good their record was during even the Legion of Boom era. But then next up, a game against Dallas down the road, where it was 2 really great teams in NFL history, and only one of them showed up. Emmitt Smith ran all over the Legion of Boom, and Dallas ran away with a key victory. So Seattle's starting to tail away. So now that brings into question, Nick, well, the last wild card could very well be up for grabs.
Yeah, it should be noted, with the Greatest Team season being played on maybe the best game, Madden 10, that there are only 2 wild card spots. It's the 4 division winners get the home game and the wild card, and then the 2 not currently in the NFL with 3. So that creates a fascinating race out of, like you mentioned, the NFC West, where maybe all 3 top dogs in that division get into the postseason, but that would squeeze out other clubs out of the NFC as a whole. And we're going to touch on those teams in just a moment out of the NFC North and other divisions in that conference. But in another thrilling Week 8 game, the game of the week, and there was a lot to choose from, by the way, Danny, in a thrilling last-second comeback, Brunell and the Jags came from a drop Jimmy Smith touchdown from overtime in a must-win game for Tennessee. And in Nashville, the Titans prevailed, and now they're tied for first in the very, very competitive AFC South.
What we talked about, especially within the real NFL season this past year, it was the AFC that had a ton of the permutations that were still at stake. Well, on the other side, for the AFC on this side of the coin, well, it seems to be a case there's a few, this AFC South, well, just like what we saw during the course of this past regular season, Nick, not that great with how the Jaguars and the Titans are, just like in terms of what we've seen this past year. They're again fighting for a division crown. The Colts, we know how great their offense is, not really much in the picture. But right now, the Jaguars and the Titans having split so far this season, that's going to be a race to the finish. But also, with what we saw during the Red Zone edition for Week 8, Nick, we saw a few other great AFC matchups as well.
Yeah, it was a week of the year that shook a lot up in this AFC. So now Tennessee is right there tied with Jacksonville for a new division leader, and it seems there's only going to be one of the AFC South, considering Jacksonville and Tennessee both have losing records. Miami set up a big game we'll talk more about later, but their win against the Jets was huge, 14-6. And what was highlighted on Red Zone, something worth bringing up here in Week 8, was the 15-point Buffalo comeback. That swung things in the AFC with Houston going out of the playoff picture now off of their loss. And now Buffalo's right in the thick of things. Bruce Smith was big on defense. We saw Andre Reed catch the go-ahead touchdown on offense. The Bills don't look quite as good as we thought early. That team was very good in 1990, but they're getting the wins they desperately need to stay afloat in the AFC East.
What's with it with Buffalo always coming back against Houston? Greatest playoff comeback of all time. 32-point comeback with Frank Reich at the helm was the greatest comeback until Frank Reich-led team. Jeff Saturday-led Colts team blew a 33-point lead to Kirk Cousins. But, yeah, no, what a weekend it was. Also, Denver. We talked about during the last quarterly report of how Denver somehow would find ways to have incredible games. Well, they've stayed away from the heart rate monitor, but still, that Ravens game, they gave up a touchdown late against the Ravens, who were on the verge of an upset, and then Denver's drove down the field thanks to John Elway, and then Jason Elam nudged through the game-winning tip shot field goal to survive. The AFC West race is also a free-for-all, as the 76 Raiders are starting to show a little bit of heat. They're not quite in the thick of the playoff picture, but they're knocking on the door. And then you have your prototypical, you have the Chiefs that are showing the resurgence as we've always seen within these last 5 years or so. So, yeah, safe to say this season, this greatest team season, it's alive and well with a lot of great matchups down the stretch and a lot of games that have been, nail-biters to the end.
Yeah, Raiders picked up a win, too, against the Chargers. That makes that Week 9 Kansas City-Oakland game for first in the AFC West. So many incredible wrinkles. We saw New Orleans survive in overtime against Atlanta, even though the Falcons came back down 14 in that one. So some sensational storylines. There's so much, too much to talk about in the quarterly report. So me and Danny, we crunched all the stats, and we came up with a couple of intriguing storylines here on the quarterly reports. And one big one is maybe the team that's come out of nowhere to make things interesting in the NFC North. That could actually be the story for the team they played in Week 8. But Minnesota's Randall Cunningham has been nothing short of superhero-esque, per se, in this next quarter of the year from Weeks 5 to 8. With just how many great comebacks they've had, all of a sudden the Vikings are making things interesting in the NFC North. In Week 5 at St. Louis, they were down by a touchdown, and Cunningham willed the team through 2 fourth downs on an 11-play, 54-yard drive to find Andrew Glover on the final play of regulation to force overtime at St. Louis. And while they wind up losing, that really set the stage for this team being the comeback cats out of the NFC. 2 weeks later at Pittsburgh, down 7, they drive 5 plays, 61 yards to tie the game, only to see Lynn Swan catch a long touchdown. So they need to go the distance again, and they did. 9 plays, 72 yards. Glover on the final play of that game clocks at zeros, catches another touchdown to force overtime. In overtime, they go 5 plays, 51 yards. Anderson kicks the field goal to win the game. All that to say, Danny, this team never quits in the fourth quarter of games, and you got to defend them until the last play of the game, especially Andrew Glover, as the Vikings are now, with the 4-4 record, right there in the NFC North. What a season it's been for them.
Yep. Well, Nick, don't forget, especially on that last drive for Cunningham to tie the game, the Vikings had to convert twice on fourth down, plus that wild sequence at the end where Cunningham threw the ball out of bounds with 4 seconds when the play started, as the ball finally hit some part of Three River Stadium with 1 second to go. And that led to the final play for Glover to score the game-tying touchdown. So if it wasn't for those heroics, who knows where Minnesota would have been in that game against, of all teams, the 78 Steelers, too. What an impressive win that was.
Just a sensational year for Minnesota. And this is part of a team that is to no surprise for Dennis Green. No surprise to the Hall of Famers on that team. So tough, so gritty. The Vikings went 15-1, and had they not lost in the NFC Championship in overtime to Atlanta, we could be talking about the 98 Vikings as one of the greatest teams of all time. What's amazing about them is that in the grand scheme of great teams ever, it's hard to remember all the greats from Minnesota. Yes, you have Chris Carter and Randy Moss, but some of the heroes included Randall Cunningham, who's been great this year, John Randall, who's been very solid this year, and a kicker who had a decent career, but all of a sudden in the late 90s became one of the great kickers ever for a 1 or 2 year span, making everything. And he's been critical too. If they don't kick field goals, they don't force overtime at St. Louis, at Pittsburgh. They've needed all the cast of characters to play well. And this team, overlooked in the span of great teams ever, has been sensational this year.
Too bad for Vikings fans. Gary Anderson missed that last kick of the season against Atlanta. That was a huge damper on what was an incredible year. But yeah, nevertheless, for Minnesota, with all the performers, who would have expected going into 1998 that would be Randall Cunningham? That would be the star of the show. The drafted quarterback from Philadelphia under Buddy Ryan. And it was an Eagles team that was good in the late 80s. And then Cunningham, in many ways, was off the map during the early portion of the 90s before his career was revitalized with Minnesota in the latter stages of his career. And then he had what was one of the best years you could ever come up for with a journeyman. And now we're seeing his excellence in all these comeback games during the course of this half of the greatest team season with just some incredible comebacks. So what a span of 4 games that we've seen with Randall Cunningham. He has led four comeback drives in 4 games during this quarter of the season. It's been off the charts how good Randall Cunningham has been.
Absolutely. Almost 2,000 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, which is one more of the league low for interceptions thrown by the guy we'll talk about here for Green Bay and the gunslinger Brett Favre. Packers and Bears, ironically, a team that we actually haven't talked about yet, the Chicago Bears, are now tied for first, not all alone in first out of the NFC North, with these Green Bay Packers after their shocking loss to Cleveland. So Green Bay finds themselves in a great position, even with how great Minnesota's been, because they beat them this week at Lambeau Field. The Packers have the half-game edge over the Vikings, tied with the Bears atop the NFC North. And Danny, you've got the Niners hat on in a great division, 6-1 Niners, 7-1 Rams in the NFC West. But I give you one better. This division is so good. There's 3 teams within a half game. Bears 4-3, Packers 4-3, Vikings 4-4. What an incredible division the NFC North is.
It's a shame that one of these teams is probably going to miss the playoffs. And if there's ever one team that has their backs against the wall, it is the Vikings because they've lost the season series to Green Bay. They lost in week 4. They lost in week 8. But if there's any team that's had their backs against the wall, it's been Minnesota all year with those great comebacks from Randall Cunningham, whether it's a late touchdown to Jake Reed against the Packers or the touchdowns from Andrew Glover late in games. Randall Cunningham has been able to exercise definitely his demons in terms of the clutch factor. He's been spectacular. But Green Bay, what a surprise they've been. After losing the first 3 games of the season, Green Bay 4 straight wins in a row. They have a record of 4-3 on the season. It comes as no surprise how great that '96 Packers team was. Maybe a little bit of controversy that team was picked over perhaps the Lombardi Packers, but with how well they dominated teams during the 1996 season, it's no surprise that Green Bay is one of the best teams in the greatest team season. But what's really surprising here, Nick, is that they're competing with the '85 Bears, who have uncharacteristically lost a ton of games that they probably shouldn't have. They lost to the 1998 Atlanta Falcons. Speaking of teams from 1998, a Falcons team that was just downright terrible throughout the greatest team season offensively, and somehow Atlanta beat Chicago in what really turned out to be some costly mistakes for the Bears late in games. And then last week, who could have expected that Bernie Kosar and the Cleveland Browns, who have done virtually nothing all season, come into Soldier Field in Chicago and somehow, some way beat the '85 Bears? I cannot fathom how that even happened. But shoot, could we see the '85 Bears miss the playoffs?
Oh, no way. That actually gets us to our prediction time, Danny. NFC North, there's 3 teams. How do you think Detroit technically is there. What do you think about this division, and where do you think these teams rank, 1 to 3 at the end of the year? Put your money where your mouth is about your question of the '85 Bears. How do you think this ends up?
Okay, I'll be honest. Are they really going to miss the playoffs? Heck, let's be honest. The '85 Bears are probably going to win the division. We've seen how dominant they've been. The evidence is out there from how, it's a question. It was almost a 50-50 chance that the quarterback starting the game against the '85 Bears was going to be hurt at the end of the game and out for a few weeks. So with how ferocious that defense was, I'm sure Mike Ditka's going to figure it out. So that's why I got the Bears winning the division. I'll even say it amidst a very tough NFC wildcard chase, which sees whoever is second place in the NFC South. A lot of teams are still in that pack. And then the Rams, obviously, or the Niners are going to be a wild card team. The Seahawks are in a race for that wild card. Heck, I'll say it. I'm going to say the '96 Packers will be the last wild card in the NFC. The Vikings will miss the playoffs amidst all the heroics that we've seen from Randall Cunningham. I don't have faith in the Vikings just yet. The head-to-head against the Packers is a real killer to their playoff hopes.
Absolutely. Minnesota's the best scoring offense in the league, the greatest team season. Too bad, though, their defense has really fallen off here in the last quarter. We were raving about them in the first quarter. They've fallen to 20th in scoring defense this year. So before we head over to our next topic quickly, the NFC as a whole, as the playoffs standings go as of now, currently San Francisco and New Orleans would be in the 2 wild card spots. Tampa would be a game back. Green Bay would be a game back. Seattle 1 game back at 4-3, and Minnesota a game and a half back. So there's a hole to climb, and I'd say you're probably right, Danny, that the Vikings miss it. That's a very big hole to climb out of, and they lost that tiebreaker earlier this week to Green Bay. Meanwhile, in the AFC, we could potentially have one of the greatest teams ever be a wild card team. One of them is destined to. The 72 Dolphins did not lose a game, neither did New England's in the regular season in 2007. And that is the upcoming matchup of Week 9 of the year in the AFC East. You see Miami is 6-1, New England is 5-2, and the whole world is watching what team's going to win this incredible division.
What a season it's been Well, we came into the quarter point after week 4, and I was over here saying the Dolphins were going to win every game. Well, the 68 Jets had other ideas. They dominated the Dolphins on Monday night, making me eat my own words up. But we saw last week on Red Zone, the Dolphins, they proved with their no-name defense with a huge victory over the Jets, exacting revenge. They're here to stay. But now they're going up against a Patriots team next week with 2 losses against teams that don't really scare you, especially in terms of the greatest team season, against Atlanta and Tennessee. Tennessee has worked their way into the lead, tied for the lead in the AFC South, but still, they're not a team that you would expect to be a contender. So now you have this matchup against the Patriots and the Dolphins, and what better way to have a playing field of 2 teams, the only 2 teams in the regular season to go undefeated in the Super Bowl era, clashing at Gillette Stadium, especially in terms of a midseason game. Hopefully there's not snow that impacts the game and affects the Dolphins' run game, but this promises to be a great game. I'm excited to see the matchup between the no-name defense of Miami and the Patriots offense that we've known to renown in high status, that broke tons of records. That's the matchup I'm going to be curious of watching, because it's strength against strength. Miami's no-name defense strength and the Patriots with their record-setting offense. To me, that's going to be where this game is going to be decided, because if the Dolphins can limit the Patriots, especially in terms of their offensive attack, especially if they can shut down the pass, that's going to be the key. If Tom Brady cannot get the ball rolling, especially through the air, they cannot rely on that running game to win them the ball game. So that's why if the Patriots, if they can utilize Wes Welker, who has been impressive during the course of this season, as well as Randy Moss, that double-headed monster, if they don't get hot, well, this could be Miami's game to win, especially on the road. But yeah, this promises to be a great matchup between Shula and Belichick, and then you have the no-name defense against Brady. This has the makings for an instant classic.
Yeah, absolutely. Foxborough. New England is currently 2nd in offense, 5th in points, and 9th in first downs. They're having a little tougher time moving the chains, and I'd say that has a lot to do with Lawrence Maroney and that running game. In 2007, that was, ironically, this offense was record-setting, but ironically, they did have a weak link, and that was the running game. Maroney was solid behind that all-star offensive line, but against Miami, I'd say that's a great opportunity for Bill Stanfill, Vern Den Herter, Nick Buoniconti, and that front 7 to get after Maroney, get after the O-line, and force them to be one-dimensional. That one dimension is incredible, but if they're only beating you by one way over the course of a game, I'd say Miami could have an upper hand offensively against New England.
Yeah, with what we've seen, I'm interested to see, especially because Bob Griese, he did one thing that Tom Brady also has done during the course of his career. Now, you don't usually see a quarterback in Bob Griese who would average about 200 yards a game, achieving something that Tom Brady has done. One time on Thanksgiving in 1977, he threw for 6 touchdowns in one game. Now, I don't expect Bob Griese to throw 6 touchdowns next week against New England, but it'll be up to Griese especially. He doesn't wow you with his passing numbers, but it could be up to him to decide who ends up winning this game next week.
It should be an incredible matchup, Miami and New England's. Before we get to the Pro Bowl selections with Bob Griese right there in the ballot, Danny, there's a couple of incredible games coming up. What are your thoughts of some of the games that fans of the DSFL should be looking out for over the next couple of weeks?
Well, first things first, obviously New England and Miami. You have the 2 undefeated teams in the regular season clashing. That's going to be a spectacular game. I'm excited to see how we always ask the age-old question, New England, Miami, who would have won in that matchup? And heck, throw in the 85 Bears in that mix. we might not be able to know the true answer, but this could be an answer in this greatest team season. The first of two matchups between the Patriots and the Dolphins during the course of the season, with the next matchup happening in the Orange Bowl after the Foxborough clash. Also, another big matchup. Well, you have two teams, the best of the 80s. That was the 80s had great music, great, lots of things, and also great football. And I'm excited to see a Thursday night matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Chicago Bears at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. And we've talked about those 85 Bears and the San Francisco 49ers, two contenders for the greatest team season, clashing on Thursday night. That's going to be a special game. Also, a lot of great games in Week 10. The Saints and the Rams, two potential division winners in that matchup at the Edward Jones Dome. That's going to be a fun game to watch. But so many great games also as well. Packers and Cowboys. The Cowboys in a wild NFC East. There's a chase there. A lot of playoff implications on the line as well in that contest between both of these two teams. And then also San Francisco and Green Bay. That's going to be a fun one in Lambeau Field. I'm excited to see how Brett Favre takes on Joe Montana, and that is a matchup that we did not see during the course of NFL history, and we get to see that in the greatest team season. So that should be a special matchup between both those two teams as well. So, yeah, a lot of great key games on the schedule coming up, but I'm just excited to see what happens next down the road. And also in Week 12, a lot of great matchups as well. Thanksgiving, you got the Dallas Cowboys of 1992 against the 1976 Raiders, which is a classic matchup. Rams and Seahawks, another great matchup, with the Seahawks trying to work their way back into the NFC West chase as well. So another fun matchup there. And heck, I'll put them out there. How about the Saints against the Patriots? Saints look really good. Patriots also strong in the greatest team season. On Monday Night Football, that's going to be a fun matchup too to watch. So a lot of great games coming up during this next quarter stretch of the greatest team season.
It really is an exciting upcoming schedule of the greatest team season. Of course, it begins this Sunday with highlights in the Extra Point Show. And Danny, you'll hear all of him after Sunday for the game of the week, for the best game from Sunday. So before we get to that, we had a special presentation of the greatest team season this week with the unveiling of the first voting of the upcoming DSFL Pro Bowl, which will be played in Miami in a couple of months. Very, very exciting. There were mainly the guys that you expected, the stars of the NFL from now and from the past, but there were a few surprises. So, Danny, I'd like to hear the two guys that you felt were snubbed and should have been in the Pro Bowl conversation.
Yeah, well, first taking a look at the Pro Bowl roster unveiling, a lot of great names that you would expect to be on there. We talked during the quarter part of the season about two running backs that were really running away with the best running back conversation, and obviously the two vote getters, especially for each conference, Terrell Davis, Walter Payton, no surprise, and then for the quarterbacks too, no surprise there with Joe Montana of the 49ers. And Tom Brady of the New England Patriots. You don't blink an eye there at all for any of those selections. But in terms of surprises, staying with the quarterbacks, for the AFC, the second best quarterback of all quarterbacks, Matt Schaub. Sure, you might remember Matt Schaub for being the guy, especially in that 2013 season, who threw pick six after pick six after pick six. But people forget, especially in terms of 2011, Matt Schaub was one of the better quarterbacks in the league. So I'm not saying that he might necessarily belong in that best quarterbacks of all time conversation, by no means. But that 2011 version of Matt Schaub was just enough, I suppose, to work your way on the list. But I can't expect that Matt Schaub is going to be at the end of the season still higher up on the rankings than even Patrick Mahomes, for crying out loud, or John Elway. Are you kidding me? Out of all the best quarterbacks in the greatest team season, Kenny Stabler, John Elway, Patrick Mahomes, Terry Bradshaw. You could go Boomer Esiason, for crying out loud. So many great names, but Matt Schaub, yeah, that's really one of the big question marks, I would say, especially so far from the AFC side, Nick.
Yeah, and what's intriguing about the quarterback conversation is there's a couple of guys on losing teams that certainly have good arguments. Joe Namath is one of those guys. Peyton Manning is another. Where their numbers are great, both of those guys are ranked 6th and 7th respectively in passing yards. The problem is the teams are a combined 5 wins and 12 losses. So you're not exactly going to wow the voters there. This is not my decision, by the way. Want to keep that clear. This is Madden's voting.